My best friend's sister accused me of getting her pregnant, but I was in another state. My parents kicked me out for believing her. Years later, the DNA test showed 0%, and they begged for forgiveness. But what I did left them speechless. I'm 26 years old. I work in digital marketing. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened like a year and a half ago basically destroyed my relationship with my parents and made me realize things about my family that I would have preferred never to discover. The thing is, when you're falsely accused of getting someone pregnant and you have literal proof that it's impossible, you'd think your own family would believe you, right? Well, turns out that doesn't always work that way, and now I'm here trying to process all of this while I try to move on with my life. I guess I should start at the beginning, or with how I met Michelle. She's the younger sister of Justin, my best friend since high school, and she's always had issues, pretty serious mental health problems. Justin told me once that Michelle had been in and out of therapy since she was like 14, and that she'd had several episodes where she'd make things up or convince herself of realities that just didn't exist. I don't want to sound cruel or anything, because I genuinely believe she needs professional help, but this information is important to understand what happened later. I was always nice to Michelle when I'd see her at Justin's house. Like, hello and goodbye, basic conversations, nothing more. We were never alone. There was never anything remotely romantic or sexual. I literally saw her as my best friend's little sister, and that's it. Everything started going to hell like 2 years ago. I think it was in March 2023 when Justin called me super nervous and said, "We need to talk. It's about Michelle." I went to his house, and he was there with this face like I don't even know how to tell you this, and then he drops on me that Michelle was saying I'd gotten her pregnant. I just stood there like, what? Because it literally made no sense. I mean, 0 sense, I told Justin. Dude, that's impossible. I've never touched your sister. We haven't even been alone ever, and he told me that he knew it was one of Michelle's things, but that she was really convinced and that his parents were starting to believe her. The first thing I did was say, okay, let's do a prenatal paternity test. Problem solved. But Michelle flat out refused, said it was dangerous for the baby, that she didn't want to risk anything, basically put up 1,000 excuses. Justin tried to convince her. I tried to talk to her calmly, but nothing. And this is where things get really ugly, because my parents found out. I don't know how the information got to them. I guess someone in the friend circle mentioned it or something. But one day I came home after work. I was like 24 at the time and still living with them because I was saving up for my own place, and they were both sitting there in the living room with that energy of, we're going to have a serious conversation. My mom started with, "We received a very concerning call," and my dad just looked at me with this disappointment in his eyes that I'd never seen before. I told them everything, explained that Michelle has mental health issues, that Justin can confirm nothing ever happened, that she's making this up, but they didn't believe me. I mean, they half believed me. They said things like, "Well, son, if it's true that something happened, you need to take responsibility." And I kept repeating to them over and over, nothing happened? Literally nothing. But they kept going with this speech about how I had to accept the situation and be a man. Like 2 weeks went by of them pressuring me constantly, and me getting more and more frustrated because how do you prove that something didn't happen? It's impossible. You know what I mean? And then I remembered a super important detail that for some reason I hadn't mentioned before. According to Michelle, she got pregnant in January, but I was all of January in California, visiting my older brother who lives there. I had photos, messages, flight records, literal proof that I was in another state during the entire period when this magical conception supposedly would have occurred. I showed everything to my parents, told them, look, it's physically impossible for me to be the father. I wasn't even in the same state. And you know what they told me? That maybe the dates were wrong. That maybe it had happened before or after, that Michelle must be confused about the timing. At that moment, I realized that no matter how much evidence I showed them, they'd already decided to believe her. My mom kept going with this whole thing about how I needed to do the right thing, and my dad started saying things like, "We're not going to tolerate you abandoning this child. Our family doesn't work that way." I tried to reason with them 1,000 more times, but every conversation ended in screaming and accusations. Finally, like in May of that year, we had the worst fight of all. My dad told me that, Either I accepted responsibility and made the necessary arrangements with Michel, or I left the house. I told him I wasn't going to accept responsibility for something I didn't do, that what they were asking me was crazy, and he literally told me. I left that same night to a hotel, and the next day I found a small apartment I could rent. It was horrible. I mean, not only was I dealing with this false accusation that could potentially ruin my life, but on top of that, my own parents had kicked me out of the house. Justin supported me through all of this, helped me with the move, and kept telling me constantly that he knew the truth. But still, it was his sister, and the situation was super awkward for him too. During the following months, I basically had no contact with my parents, except for occasional messages from my mom saying I could still fix things if I would just accept my responsibilities. Michelle had the baby in October, and there had to be a paternity test because there was no more excuse about prenatal risk. The judge ordered the test. I went. They did the standard procedure with the swab in the mouth and all that, and we waited for the results. It was like 2 of the most stressful weeks of my life, because part of me, even though I knew it was impossible, I had this irrational fear that something would go wrong with the test, or that the universe had gone crazy, and somehow, magically, I was the father, despite having been in another state. It sounds ridiculous, but when your whole family is against you, you start doubting your own reality, you know? The results came in late October. 0% probability of paternity. 0. Not like 0.1% or some margin of error, but absolute 0. It wasn't even biologically possible. I sent the results to my parents by email with a message that basically said, "Here's your proof. I hope you're happy." And I didn't hear anything from them for like a week. Then my mom showed up at my apartment crying, saying she was so sorry, that they'd made a terrible mistake, and to please forgive them. My dad sent a similar message and also offered me money to help with the expenses I'd had during those months, living alone. But the truth is, I was so angry, so hurt, that I couldn't just forgive them just like that. I told them I needed time, that they'd done enormous damage to me by not believing me when I had clear proof of my innocence, and that their apology, although appreciated, didn't erase the fact that they'd kicked me out of the house and basically destroyed our relationship by believing a stranger with mental health issues over their own son. My mom said she understood, that she'd give me all the space I needed. But then she started sending me messages every 2 days asking if I was ready to talk yet, which obviously wasn't giving me space. I thought that would be the end of it all, that with the paternity test clearly showing I wasn't the father, Michelle would calm down and everyone would move on with their lives. But no, because turns out Michelle started saying the results were falsified, that I'd paid the lab to change the numbers, that the system was corrupt and designed to protect men like me. I know, it sounds completely delusional, but she was saying it seriously and some people believed her. Justin told me his parents had finally taken her to a psychiatric hospital for a serious evaluation, but the damage was already done. The worst part was when my parents, instead of just apologizing and leaving it at that, decided they needed to actively clear my name, which in theory sounds good, but in practice was a total disaster. They started contacting my friends, acquaintances, people I work with, basically anyone they knew, to explain the situation to them and tell them it had all been a misunderstanding. Brian, a friend from high school who I barely talk to anymore, called me one day and said, "Dude, your mom called me and told me this whole crazy story about a false pregnancy. What's up with that?" I was mortified. Like, I don't need my parents going around explaining my personal life to people I don't even have regular contact with. I asked them to stop, that there was already enough drama and that their PR campaign was only making more people aware of a situation I'd prefer to forget, but they insisted they were helping, that they were protecting my reputation. The straw that broke the camel's back was when my boss called me into his office. He had this concerned face and told me that my parents had called the company expressing concern about my emotional and mental well-being after going through such a traumatic false accusation. It was so humiliating, so invasive, that I just wanted the earth to swallow me right there. I explained to my boss that yes, I'd gone through a difficult situation, but that I was fine and that my parents were overstepping boundaries without my permission. After that, I sent them a very clear email, telling them to stop any kind of contact with people in my life, that I appreciated that they wanted to help, but that it wasn't their place or their decision, and that if they really wanted to support me, they needed to respect my boundaries. My dad responded something defensive, saying they only wanted what was best for me, and my mom called me crying, saying she didn't understand why I was being so hard on them when they were just trying to make up for their mistake. But I wasn't being hard. I was setting basic boundaries that any two 6-year-old adults should be able to have with their parents. I decided I needed legal protection, so I consulted with a lawyer, Thomas, who helped me draft a restraining order against my parents. It sounds extreme, I know, and believe me, it wasn't a decision I made lightly, but after everything that had happened, and given that they weren't respecting my request to leave me alone, I felt I had no other choice. The order was approved by the judge, basically establishing that they couldn't contact me directly or show up at my work or apartment without legal consequences. My parents were furious when they found out. They sent my Aunt Victoria to talk to me to tell me I was destroying the family, that how could I do this to them after everything they'd done for me during my life. But the thing is, yes, they raised me and gave me a roof and food and education, and I'm grateful for that, but that doesn't give them the right to not believe me when I have clear proof of my innocence, to kick me out of the house, and then to invade my privacy and violate my boundaries when they try to make up for it. Parenthood isn't a blank check to do whatever they want without consequences. You know what I mean? Things got even crazier when, like 2 months after the restraining order, my car woke up vandalized. Someone had keyed the word liar into the paint, super deep. It was going to cost a fortune to fix. I couldn't prove it was my parents, but the coincidence was too obvious. I filed the police report. The parking lot cameras didn't capture anything useful, and basically, I had to pay out of pocket to fix the damage. I started feeling genuinely paranoid, like looking over my shoulder constantly, wondering what else they might do. The next thing that happened was that, and I still can't believe this is real, my parents sued me for emotional distress. The lawsuit said that I had caused severe emotional stress by obtaining a restraining order against them and by refusing to forgive them after they apologized. Their lawyer argued that they had acted based on the information available at the time, that they had offered sincere apologies, and that my refusal to reconcile was causing them psychological trauma. It was so absurd that my own lawyer Thomas almost laughed when he showed me the documents, but we still had to go to court and deal with the whole legal process. The judge was not kind at all to my parents. He basically told them that kicking a son out of the house based on accusations, without proof, ignoring clear evidence of his innocence, and then repeatedly violating his boundaries didn't give them grounds to sue when that son decided to protect himself legally. The case was dismissed, and the judge also ordered them to pay my legal fees, which weren't cheap at all. I think that finally made them understand that I wasn't going to give in, that I'd set these boundaries seriously, and that I was going to defend them no matter what. There was a period of like 3 months where I didn't hear anything from them, and honestly, it was the most peaceful time I'd had in years. I could focus on my work, go out with friends without worrying that my parents had contacted them beforehand, live my life without this constant weight of family drama. I started dating someone, Megan, a girl I met at a networking event, and it was nice to be able to have a relationship without having to immediately explain all this crazy family baggage. We lasted like 4 months before Michelle, because of course, found Megan's profile on social media and sent her a message telling her distorted version of events. Megan asked me about it. I explained the truth with documents and everything, and she believed me, but still it was awkward, and eventually the relationship didn't work out for other reasons. Last month, my cousin Victoria contacted me, theoretically to catch up, but really to tell me that my parents were planning a big family reunion for Christmas. Like all the aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and that obviously I was invited, or rather expected. I made it very clear through Victoria that I wouldn't attend, that the restraining order had technically already expired, but that my boundaries remained firm, and that a forced family reunion wasn't going to change anything about what had happened. Victoria tried the speech about, but they're your parents. Family is the most important thing, all those canned phrases people say when they don't understand the full situation. I sent, get them a final email, the last contact I've had with them until now, explaining to them point by point why I wasn't interested in a reconciliation. I told them I didn't trust them, that they'd shown that when things get difficult they prefer to believe strangers over their own son, that they'd violated my boundaries repeatedly even after apologizing, and that their attempt to sue me had been the final confirmation that they didn't understand the damage they'd caused. I wished them the best, but asked them to respect my decision to have no contact, and that if there was ever any real emergency, they could contact my lawyer and he would let me know. My mom responded with a long emotional message saying they would always love me, that the door to their house would always be open, that they hoped someday I could forgive them. My dad sent something shorter, basically saying he respected my decision even though he didn't understand it, and that he hoped I would be happy with the life haven't chosen. I didn't respond to either message. I deleted their emails, blocked their numbers again just in case, and moved forward. Now I'm 26 years old. I live alone in a decent apartment. My work is going well. I've been in therapy processing all of this, and the truth is, I'm in a much better place than 2 years ago. Is it weird not to have contact with your parents? Yes, definitely. Do people ask me about them at social gatherings and it's awkward to explain? Also yes. But do I regret having set those boundaries and having kept them firm? No, not at all. I learned that you can love your family and at the same time recognize that they're toxic for your mental well-being, and that it's okay to prioritize your mental health over maintaining relationships that hurt you. Family isn't an excuse to tolerate everything, and forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone just because they share your DNA. Justin and I are still friends, although obviously it's not the same anymore. Michelle was eventually formally diagnosed with a disorder that explained her episodes of delusions, and I genuinely hope she's getting the help she needs. As for my parents, I don't know what they're doing now. If they still talk about me at family dinners, if they tell people their son abandoned them for no reason. Honestly, I don't care anymore. I made peace with the situation, understood that I did everything I could to maintain that relationship and that it was they who destroyed it with their actions. And now I'm focused on building my own life with people who do believe me, who do respect my boundaries, and who aren't going to kick me to the street the first time something difficult happens. The other night I was having dinner with some friends and someone mentioned something about family drama, and I realized I no longer feel that stab of pain in my chest when I think about my parents. I just feel a kind of calm indifference, like when you think about people you used to know but who are no longer part of your life. And I think that's progress. You know? You don't need a happy ending of reconciliation to be okay. Sometimes simply being at peace with the decision you made is enough. That's it, I guess. That's my story of how a false accusation and parents who didn't believe me led me to completely cut contact with them, and why I don't regret that decision one bit.